Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. 5 months ago, the National Wales was launched with the aim of creating a national news service for Wales. It has gone from strength to strength since then, now producing a weekly print edition, hiring more journalists and covering Welsh issues on a daily basis. Tonight we're speaking to its founder, Huw Marhsall, about the paper and what's next for Welsh media. Hello, Huw.
Hello, Shwmai.
Shwmai, diolch am ymuno ni. So, nice and easy first broad question. How would you describe the current state of the Welsh media, and how do you think that's changed in the past, say, 5 years or so?
I think it's moving in the right direction. I think, the fact that there are now a number of sort of players in that market beyond, the ones who were there, who've been there for a long time. The BBC have got, dominance in that market, from a television perspective, but also digitally. So, the BBC news websites and sport websites are, two of the most visited websites on a daily basis, in Wales and the UK. And it's interesting as well, the Welsh language version of their service, BBC Cymru Fyw, is excellent. And what's strange is that isn't replicated in the English version. So BBC Cymru Fyw in Welsh, for people who aren't aware, it's a rolling sort of blog and sort of news service. It's got news stuff, it's got magazine items, digitally that's available, sort of that rolls throughout the day. So yeah, so they're doing it, Wales Online, Daily Post, Western Mail. And I think, when you look at stuff that Will Hayward's been doing, particularly, he's been doing excellent stuff. Again, it's unfortunate from that perspective is, that they've split Wales into two bits because that's the nature of their business. Wales Online does cover the whole of Wales, but it does tend to be very M4 corridor. And then, obviously North Wales Live is the digital version up in the north that goes along with the Daily Post. But there are other platforms out there now. Nation has been going for 4 years. You've got Gwalia, Desolation, Voice. So there's lots of these sort of starting up. But I think what we found was, when we were developing the National, was that need for a national news service that was basically sort of serious journalism. And I think we're still finding our way. We get criticisms, and I'm critical of our output at times when sometimes we tend to go a little bit off piste and trying to do stuff that's going to generate sort of numbers and stuff. And that's the danger, is this feeling that you've got to create numbers rather than actually thinking about the quality of the content. So yeah, no, I think it's getting better. But just the fact that when we started up, we are basically the first national news service in digital and print. So it's bonkers when you think about other European countries, but not just countries. You're looking at sort of regions within Spain. If you go to somewhere like the Basque Country or to Catalonia, they've got numerous national newspapers, as well as the Spanish national titles. Scotland have got loads, and the fact they've got those titles means that they've got Scottish versions of the Mirror, stuff like that. And I think that is what actually drove the evolution faster in Scotland, which is why they had the Parliament. Obviously, they had things like education and legal system was already in place, which gave them that step up. But I think the fact that the media there was much stronger helped do that. And we are playing catch up in Wales. But, I think it's positive. The feedback we get is generally very, very good. We have got our detractors, and some people are detractors not because of the output, but because there's people like me that are behind it. But that's I just take that on the chin. I've got thick enough skin for that.
Well, in the spirit of clickbait, Huw, we'll have to call this episode "You'll Never Guess What the Founder of the National Said" on this episode. But you've been producing the National as a print copy for 5 months or so now, and obviously you must have been doing something, right? Because that's now a weekly print edition.
Yeah. Again, when we launched it, because we realised that launching a digital service is one thing. Our business model is based around digital subscriptions. We need to build up as many digital subscribers, and even though it's published by NewsQuest, who part of a global company, we're in the same status, bizarre really. The National shares the same font as USA Today, because we're part of the same group as the Net Media, So it's a global company, and and at the end of the day, we exist to make revenues. But with the national, it's almost like we're being allowed to experiment with a new platform, because it's not very often you see new news titles being launched. So we're a new startup basically. We're going for 5 months. We're looking at the subscription model, and we're working all the time looking at what kind of content, what audiences want from us. That's one of the key things. But when we launched, we thought, well, because NewsQuest publish 14, 15 local titles around Wales, from the South Wales Argus in the southeast, Tyneside Advertiser in the west, and the Leader and the North Wales Pioneer up in the north. They are a print company, but on a local level. And we thought, well, what if we launched the print edition of it as well, just to get out in the newsstands, just from a brand perspective? So we did that, and the response was great. And again, that was all based on word of mouth. The sales were really good. Then we decided to do one like an election special, because obviously the elections were being held, was it the 6th of April? So it was only sort of 5 weeks after we launched. So we did that, and again, the response to that was amazing. So we decided, right, we thought from the initial response, there's something in this, that maybe print isn't dead. So we took the plunge and started publishing on a weekly basis, which is a challenge, because obviously we started with quite a small team, and obviously it's a pound. We priced it so people buy it. So it's not something that's making sort of mega bucks, but we want to make sure that we had it out there. But it's interesting. The response to the paper is really, really positive. But we've got a job now to do to make people realise buying the paper is great. We love you if you buy the paper, but it's that digital subscription that's what's going to help us sustain and build the company. And we've made the promise that every penny of digital subscription is reinvested in staff. So obviously the more subscribers we have, we'll have a big team. So by the day we get to 10,000 subscribers, we'll have a big enough team to potentially be running a daily digital radio station with video content on a regular basis, and a daily newspaper. There's nothing stopping us doing that, but it's just we need the audience in Wales to do that. But there's a few initiatives that are coming out soon that will make a big difference, I think, to our audience in the future.
You said there you don't think that print media is dead. I mean, that was the thought for so long, which is why everything was starting on a digital basis for the last few years. Do you think that the creation of a print edition is more a symbolic gesture, the idea that it is a national newspaper for Wales? Because most people, I think, still get their news in a digital format now. Surely that is still the future of news.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think if you buy the paper and you read the paper, you see that it is trying to do things differently. So it's not what's happened on the Friday and telling people what's going on. It's more about what's going on in Wales and discussing issues. So hopefully, I think the fact that we're doing something that is different, the fact that our sport is predominantly around the Wales Premier League, and we're talking about rugby at the lower levels. So we're trying to do stuff that other people aren't doing, and getting that out to people. But I think, what we found a lot of people were saying to us is they haven't bought, it's the first time they bought a newspaper in years, and the reason was they didn't like what was out there. They didn't like newspapers that were basically the mouthpieces of their billionaire owners or whatever. So the fact that we're able to produce, a national newspaper with, contributions from across Wales, covering the whole of Wales, and discussing things, in a politically neutral manner, and giving voice to different voices from across the political spectrum. I think, but I think, yeah, definitely. I think, having that is important. I'd love to see more. I don't understand why, we've sort of gone in with, I don't know, I suppose people would say that we're, sort of more of the sort of Guardian sort of thing. But, I'd love to see a Mirror / Sun paper from a Welsh perspective, that is more of a tabloid, that discusses the things that a lot of people day to day are interested in, celebrity culture and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, just getting that, the beauty of those is hopefully you think that people will pick up the nuggets about devolved governments and, what's going on, and what's happening with the IPCC report and stuff like that, because we know, because our philosophy is, we know that there are 10,000 people out there in Wales and around the world who, we think that we're willing to take our subscription to support us and fund the service. And I think, there's potentially 5 to 10,000 people out there who, if they get their hands on the National and enjoy it, would do that. Because what we find is, once people have started buying it, they're buying it every week, and it's worth it just for the Sudoku.
Yeah, I see your attempts to complete the Sudoku.
Oh, terrible! I've done the medium. I'm still trying to do the hard, and it's now 5 days later.
I was going to ask, is there much of a geographical split that you can see in your readers? Because everyone always says that Welsh media and Welsh politics are heavily dominated by people who live in the south. Is that the case from your readership as well?
It isn't. What's interesting from our readership is it sells well in the university towns. So Wrexham, Bangor, Aberystwyth, Carmarthen, Swansea, Cardiff, Newport. It's strange. It's almost as if there is some sort of community around universities. Maybe it's just university lecturers and the students who are buying it. But no, that's interesting. It is a geographic spread. Because we sell in Cardiff. It's the north of Cardiff that we sell bigger numbers in. Because I would have thought it'd be like some Pontcan and Greensand, but it isn't. It's Rubina around there. So it's interesting. But again, it depends on where it's on sale and how visible it is. So maybe you find that in some places it is visible. People have gone in and they're buying it and they're telling their friends. Because what we're trying to do as well now is go out and buy a copy, buy 2, and give 1 to a friend to introduce them to it. Because, like I said, I think it is important. What we're trying to do, is do something impartial, just make people aware of what's going on in Wales and around them, what's the thing. But definitely, yeah, I think as a statement, and having, being on a newsstand gives you credibility.
That's my weekly subscription in Thornhill, popping up your North Cardiff numbers there, Huw. I was really interested this week in the National's coverage of the climate crisis and how the paper gave it a particularly Welsh dimension. How important to you is it that Welsh media not only covers the hyper-local issues, but also gives Welsh angles on international problems?
Well, it's massively important, because the whole point of this is that we discuss everything, whether it's, a council decision in Bridgend, or whether it's a global decision in Geneva, from a Welsh perspective, because we're citizens of Wales, but we're citizens of the world as well. But what we found as well is, because obviously, there was 2 years of planning and research went in before we actually launched the National. Because what we realised was that basically our content strategy is based around 4 pillars. So obviously, news and politics is the main one, and then the 3 other ones are sort of business and the economy, arts and culture. But the other important one was the environment and rural affairs, because the research was showing, people think like Reuters Institute, I think it was like 81%, but the environment is one of the most important things that they're concerned about. And in the UK, because obviously they're just doing a UK basis, was one of the highest in the world. So funnily enough, where you think that we're not, in the UK or in Wales bothered about it, we are actually interested in it. But that's the other thing we're trying to say is, because every 500 subscribers allows us to hire, because we built the core team, but from now on, every 500 subscribers allows us to hire a specific content editor. So, if we can get 500 people who are passionate about the environment to subscribe, we will employ an environment editor. And the same thing with arts and culture and business and economy. So that's something that we're working on, is looking at those subjects. But yeah, definitely, why wouldn't we discuss anything from a Welsh perspective? And obviously we're hosting sort of the Welsh Environmental Awards in November, because again, we see that from our point of view, from a brand point of view, but it's also an important subject, and it's a chance there to showcase, individuals, organisations and projects that are actually happening in Wales, because a lot of people just don't know about these things. Because one of my favourite bits of the National is the stories that Cyril Griffiths writes, the environmental stuff. She's coming up with amazing stories, like the orchard up in Brumbo by the old steelworks, and a farmer who's trying to sort of grow traditional grains that have disappeared for centuries. So we're getting those stories, and they're interesting stories, but they're making very important points.
I know you're not too interested in clicks. You want the quality, not the clickbait. But you must, map that a bit. Can you give us any sort of insight into what kind of stories drive the most traffic on the National's website?
Yeah, it was over the last few weeks. The stuff that was, that did drive a lot, unsurprisingly, was the Olympic stuff. When we're talking about Welsh coverage, especially when we're discussing how Wales would perform if we were independent and competing as a country, where Wales would sort of show in the world, and that kind of stuff was popular. But even things like one of the most popular stories in the last month was around the Australian food imports, because obviously in Wales we forget, even though sort of the rural economy, it's not massive, but it's an important part of it. But a lot of people in Wales are part of that economy, whether they're actually working in it or whether they live in those environments. So stories that that discuss things from a Welsh perspective, which is what all of ours do. So on Facebook, we've seen our Facebook following grow by sort of 10% in the last couple of weeks. So again, I think people are starting to see our content now. So our growth has been steady, but it's starting to ramp up, which is exactly what we want to do. But if you look at what our reach based on our following on Facebook compared with rival or similar titles in Wales, we're punching way above our weight. You know what I mean? We're from a comparative point of view, we'd just be below where Wales Online are. But obviously, they've got hundreds of thousands following. We're in the thousands at the moment. But we know there's going to take time for us to grow our audience there. And also, we need to work on our content on those platforms and create content that's unique to those platforms, rather than at the moment content that it's a headline that drives you to the website. I just want to see more sort of people, because when we put stuff out on video and stuff, it performs really, really well. And I think that's what people expect from a news service now.
You mentioned the Olympics. We're going to talk a little bit about sport. You've made a really big thing in the National, putting Welsh domestic sports, League of Wales football, first and foremost on the sports pages. Could you talk us a little bit about the thinking there? And also what kind of reaction you've had to that being your outlook, rather than looking at how, say, Cardiff City or Swansea are doing in the English football pyramid?
I think it's just a case of, what's being done at the moment. So obviously the BBC cover, sort of the English pyramid well substantially, and they do that in Wales as well, because obviously, they've got radio broadcasts, that are based on, on locations with those different elements in there, but also on their website. Coming from the north myself, when I was brought up in Wrexham, but I'm half Scouse. So, I support Everton. So, the Daily Post, people buy the Daily Post for, obviously Wrexham is a big thing now, but it was mainly for Man United, Liverpool, and Everton. And I think in the south, the South Wales Echo does Cardiff, the Argus does Newport. So those are covered by, the local audiences. And I don't know what the Swansea, as the Evening Post, they cover Swansea. So those are being covered. But I think the fact that the sort of JD Premier, it's our national league and our national sport. So the fact that maybe those local titles, because they are generally, local, we've got the advantage from being a national to be able to cover the whole of the game. Because, on Saturday, we had a profile of all the teams. So even if you're not aware of it, you could sit down there and read on our page, and you could understand a bit about, who those teams, what those teams are. And I think, that there's a growing interest in that. And I think, again, the only way that is going to grow is by people normalizing it and drawing attention to it. And the feedback we get from that is great. I still find it frustrating when people complain about, oh, nobody's covering the JD, whatever. And I keep saying, well, have you looked at the National? And say, yes. I says, well, we're trying to do that. And we'll be launching a football email bulletin in next couple of weeks, focusing on the JD Premier. So, we're building that commitment to do that. But, there's an audience there. There's a gap in the market, and we're filling it.
We've spoken to a number of the National's writers in the past. How have you tried to deal with the need for new voices with getting more experienced journalists and columnists into the paper as like a draw?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because obviously, from my point of view, I'm not involved editorially with the title. So Gavin is the editor, and Sarah looks after the paper. So I'm not involved editorially. When we spoke about when we were launching it, the idea behind it with New Media Wales was that it would be politically neutral and would give different voices, and it does that. You've got columns from Lena Farhat, who's a Lib Dem, Leanne Wood and David Wigley, Plaid, and from different, ends of Plaid. Carwyn Jones, obviously, a former First Minister. And it's funny because you get some people who come on and say, I'm not buying that, it's got Carwyn Jones in it, or I'm not buying that because it's got Leanne Wood in it. I say, well, we're trying to get a balance there, you know what I mean? Because, I'd like to hear more conservative voices, because, politically, wherever you're from, quarter of the Welsh population voted Conservative at the last Senedd election, almost. So, it's important that, those voices, are heard, but also that all those voices are challenged. I think that's what's really important. But yeah, because I keep out of it, that in the process of setting up an editorial board that will oversee that, to ensure that it is, sticking to those principles, that digitally and in print, that it is balanced, that it's not giving, leaning one way or the other. Because when we launched, it was like we support the current devolution settlement because it's been voted for democratically by majority in Wales. I'm looking forward now is looking at the opinion polls, and what people want is there's obviously a conversation to be had around independence, but there's also a conversation to be had about the federalist approach, which is what Welsh Labour's favoured position is. But it's obviously, it's the discussions around, well, why aren't things like policing devolved? Why haven't we got our own, sort of lawmaking powers and our own legal system? And, those conversations are coming now from within the Welsh Labour government. So again, by us raising those and asking those questions, hopefully, it helps push that conversation along.
When you talk about holding opinions to account, how would you try and reconcile that very legitimate position with the way that people tend to interact with each other on social media, which is, I'm sure we're all aware, can be a bit vitriolic sometimes? How do you think that we learn to adapt to that difference now in the modern world and the modern media environment?
Well, I don't know. I think, because if you look at something like Byline Times, for example, and basically, if you look at things based on fact, then that has to be the basis of everything. It's the factual side of stuff. So you've got to look at the fact. But I remember I listened to an advert at GB News saying there's always more than one side to a story. But sometimes there isn't. You know what I mean? Sometimes there's one side to the story, and that is factually this is what happened or is happening. So there is no counterpoint. Getting a counterpoint is completely pointless, because all you're going to get is somebody just talking nonsense. Because we saw it, Newsnight the other night, where they had that well-known environmentalist, the Prime Minister's father, on, and it just reminded me of when Newsnight, when they discussed the Welsh language bill 4 or 5 years ago, where they had that giant mind from the Welsh language, Julian Ruck, who's basically a professional Welsh language troll, to talk about Welsh language policy and stuff like that. And it's this business of you've got to have two sides to everything. I don't agree with that. To have people putting counter arguments across. It was interesting. There was an opinion piece today from the editor of the Western Telegraph talking about Cardiff and how she thinks that it is, a dual and its redevelopment, and and that caused discussions. But it was a response really to an article that Rebecca wrote a week or two back about the fact that the gentrification of Cardiff Bay and stuff like that. So you can have different viewpoints and you can put them out there, because that's an example where there are people who are coming at it from different perspectives. But in some cases, because like I say, if you can't say, is it raining outside? Well, you go out now, it's raining. There is no counterpoint to that. It's a statement of fact. And I think when we move away from that, I think it really helps. But I think that the BBC have almost dug themselves into a hole by being almost, we've got to have balance. So if somebody's got this view, we've got to get somebody who's the opposite of it in order to create a discussion. And and that's, for me, I don't see it that way.
You've hinted at my favourite quote about journalism, which is it's not a journalist's job to have two views on whether it's raining outside or not. It's the journalist's job to look out the window, which is always been my favorite journalism quote.
And our sort of tagline, and other people use it, but our job isn't to tell people what to think. Our job is to help people come to informed decisions. So you put the facts in front of them. So this is the situation now. Because if you look at something like, because people know my political background, I've stood for Plaid Cymru twice. I've been on the Yes Cymru Central Committee. So, my politics when it comes to Wales is completely clear. But if you said, Wales should be independent and we could be independent tomorrow, I would be the first person to say it couldn't. We haven't even got our own legal, these are the things that, that's, I think, where these conversations we have, because people just aren't aware. When we talk about the economy in Wales, there's so much of a lack of understanding, the Barnett formula, because that's one thing we should be looking at, is how to explain the Barnett formula. I challenge anybody, to explain what the Barnett formula is. I'd like, maybe someone like Richard Wyn-Jones could do it. But, for me as a normal individual, basically you hear, Rishi Sunak saying there's going to be £1 billion for the health service in England, and automatically we just say, there's going to be £200,000. So it's not like Welsh Government decides how much they're going to spend and how much they're going to put into that. It's basically what we're given by another government to spend here in Wales. So, because, I don't know, do people see devolved government as, being governed by, a First Minister like Mark Drakeford, who's come to the fore in the last few months, or is the current Welsh Government, under the way it's set up, basically just administering a budget that's set in Westminster by Conservative government?
Do you see the National expanding its Welsh language offer in the future? Because there's quite a few publications already in that sphere, such as Barn and Golwg. Do you think there's room for growth there?
Yeah, definitely. Because one of the things we did with the National is, we've got a page that that I help curate, which is basically 3 stories from the week written with Welsh learners in mind. So, there's 3 Welsh language stories there with a lexicon down the side, to, with the words that maybe aren't familiar. But yeah, definitely, because I think one of the things we find is, and it's not just, getting more Welsh language content in there, but also more content about the Welsh language. Because when you think about all those people who send their kids to Welsh medium education, 60% of kids in Welsh medium education come from English-speaking households. So how do those parents and carers know about what's going on in the Welsh language? What are the benefits of what their children are learning in school, and that ability that they've got to be bilingual? What does it mean for them in a wider context? Because I think the problem in Wales is, from a Welsh language media thing, that it tends to be this bubble that Welsh language news struggles to get out of, that Welsh language media bubble. But definitely, but I think from our point of view strategically, because obviously you've got Golwg 360, which is funded by Welsh Government via the Books Council. That service is there. S4C have launched a new service, which is some sort of original journalism in conjunction with ITV, but also as an aggregator for news. And you've got the other magazines. The problem with the Welsh language markets is just the size of it, is having enough of a critical mass to make it financially viable. Because even though we think, there's say there's whatever the number is, 800, 900, 600, 800, 900,000 Welsh speakers, well, over half of those are under 16. Because that's where the growth is in those things. So obviously they're not going to be spending on stuff. But again, we need to be, making them aware that it is normal to be able to read news and access news through the medium of Welsh. But definitely our Welsh language output in print will increase, because obviously we want to be part of that Cymraeg 2050, the language journey that people are on, helping people to almost be like a gateway to Golwg and to Barn and to other things. But I think definitely, popularising news through the medium of Welsh is important, and especially I like to see us do more stuff in the education sector, with creating a Welsh language, version of what we're doing for schools and stuff.
How much of the Welsh language content is available on your digital platforms?
None at the moment, but that's just, and when we set it up, we set up the website to be specific about that, and we looked at that stuff. But that's why we're in talks with different partners now about helping us support that, because obviously what you want to do as well is make sure that content is grammatically correct and stuff. So at the moment, we're doing that internally. So before we put it out there, but soon it will, anything that's in the paper will be there and have it there as a resource. But we're primarily an English language service, and we launched from that point of view because there are Welsh language, alternatives at Cymro. It's a monthly Welsh language newspaper, Golwg, Newyddion S4C. So there are things out there. So to compete with those is a challenge. So that's why we want to target a specific part of that audience, but also just strategically, aligns with what the government are doing in order to support the growth of the language.
So what's the future for the National? Where do you go next from here?
Yeah, well, I think, we're going to be launching a few things in the next couple of weeks, touch wood, as I touch some Formica in my office. The fact that, obviously the newspaper and the digital news service are two separate things. So, we want to make sure that we bring those two together so that digital subscribers get the whole value of things. So I think at the moment there are people thinking, well, I buy the newspaper, I spend £1 a week and that's great. We need those digital subscribers. That's where our growth and our revenues to employ journalists is going to come from. So we hopefully in the next couple of weeks be launching the national app, which means then digital subscribers will be able to access all the web content, but also a digital page turning version of the newspaper as well. The newspaper now is being offered in different locations around Wales on a home delivery basis, and that's being sort of taken up. I think we've got an offer going out in the north this weekend. Yeah, and I think just you'll be able to buy the national through mail order, and that's the other big one. Because obviously people outside of Wales, where can we get hold of a copy? And people in Wales who maybe we're available in most places, but we're not at the moment because it's a weekly. We're not available in Spars, and lots of villages around Wales are reliant on they maybe they've got a Spar, so their local newspaper. And the other thing, I went around Cardiff on Saturday because I go around Cardiff. Because I live in Bridgend, go into Cardiff, just go around the outlets just to check that it's on sale, whatever. And I was going around, and what I noticed was I was going to places where there used to be news agents. So there was a news agent on the corner from Womanby Street, opposite the car park. Went in there. There's not a news agent, it's an off license. So they stopped selling newspapers there. There was one by the Angel Hotel. It's still got the Sun sign up outside. Don't sell newspapers anymore. So that's the thing now. You're finding that newspapers do tend to be available only in sort of supermarkets or Spars and shops like that are less of those things. So making it available by mail, having a digital version of it, again from a global audience, because we want to grow that global audience, because we know there are people interested in Wales beyond where we are. But I think that for me the big next step now is to develop our audio and video offering. My big frustration, anybody who follows me on Twitter will know about the fact that in Wales we all moan in the morning about listening to Radio 4 and they say, well, that should be devolved, right? Because we're not listening to news services in Wales. Radio Wales, to me, is more of a Welsh version of Radio 2. Radio Cymru is, more of a Welsh language version of Radio 2 with a bit of Radio 6 or whatever in the evening. We need that Radio 4. We need that LBC in Wales. We need people talking and discussing Welsh matters all day long from a Welsh perspective. So hopefully in the autumn you'll see some movement from us from that, and also the national conversation, because we want to start as well going out and doing physical events. So 8th or 9th or 10th of October, whatever, the Saturday and Sunday in October, I think it's the 9th and 10th actually, in Pontypridd, we're going to have a weekend of events there discussing the Constitution. So we're going to have these road shows once every 6 months, online and in person, where we're going to be discussing the future of Wales and looking at different subjects. And hopefully Hiraeth will be joining us there for that weekend to have that discussion. Because the other thing is we want to go to places like Pontypridd so we can actually take the national into communities where people maybe don't get a chance to go to discussions around politics, Welsh politics. And again, it's a chance for us to be out on the street selling the national and making people aware of what we are and what we're doing. So there's a benefit to us, but hopefully those conversations that we can have and develop, will benefit everybody in the long term.
I mean, we can attest to people outside of Wales being interested in Welsh politics, as our listeners from Cyprus and Vietnam will attest to.
Yeah, somebody actually got in touch because I think that's something I need to follow up on, because somebody in South Korea said that the site was geo-blocked there. They couldn't access the stuff. So, because it's quite interesting where we got people in Australia who were asking when's it going to be available through the post so they can get a copy out there. And, we know, there's that Welsh, I know we go on about, Patagonia and, and the discussions around colonialism and stuff down there. But when you think about North America, how many people from there, how many people from Australia, how many Welsh people, because they don't, there's an estimated 100,000 Welsh speakers in England. So, how many more Welsh people are there? So how do we get to those people beyond our boundary? So again, we've got a long way to go, but we're going in the right direction. But again, if you're listening to this now and you're not a subscriber, your subscription does make a difference. And I'm make no bones about plugging that, because basically without that subscription we can't continue to grow. So it's the national.wales/subscribe. It's £1 a month for the first 2 months, and then it goes up to £6.99.
Absolute bargain, Huw. We're going to end with one question that's a bit more holistic. What does a healthy Welsh media landscape look like to you, and how do you think we get there? What are the steps that everyone in Wales needs to take in order to get to that healthy media landscape?
I think, again, just more products, titles, content that is produced in Wales. I just find, the whole TV and radio thing is frustrating, we're a little offshoot of, the BBC in Wales. We get these half-hour opt-outs, but, all our content comes from there, and our news follows the UK news. So, it's we're automatically sort of subservient to that. And saying, if you watch news from in the Welsh language, it's completely different, because they discuss topics from, a Welsh, national, and then international level through the medium of Welsh. So it can be done, and it is being done. That's the frustrating thing. But, the fact that you've got a plethora of different radio stations in the English language available, sort of for music, classical music, sport, news, current affairs, comedy, drama and stuff. And in Wales, we just haven't got that. So for me, I'd just love to see us having a radio, national radio 1, 2, 3 and 4, where we can offer that thing to people in Wales. I'd love to see, alongside the national, maybe a sort of a tabloid version of something like the national. Again, if people buy it in enough numbers, and people subscribe in enough numbers, we can publish as a daily national newspaper. Change the sort of thing, remit of it maybe, and maybe the national will become more, as it is now, more of like a Sunday paper with the sort of longer reads and stuff in there. But anything is possible. But all we need is people to support us, and and as I say, subscribe, give us your money. To me, it's an investment. You're investing in something, and hopefully you feel as you've got ownership of it as well.
Well, Huw, diolch am siarad ni heno. Thank you for talking with us this evening. If people want to find out more about what you've got to say, where can they find you on Twitter? At
Marhsall Media, which is where I spout most of my nonsense. But the New Media Wales website, I'm in the process of revamping that and relaunching that as well, as my focus now moves on to that audio and video side of it, because I think that's, we've got the national as a national news platform, and that's what New Media Wales was there to set that up. So the next one, I've successfully managed to do that, which is for me, it's amazing. I still kick myself that it's actually happened. But I think the next step is what I was saying, about the national radio 1, 2, and 3 and 4. For me, that's the next one. So how do we make that happen? And the physical events as well. How do we make these, sort of happen on a regular basis? I'd like to see, Wales having its own sort of hey on why, but actually in Wales. And, even though it is technically in Wales, it actually looks at it from a Welsh perspective. I think we can do almost like an English language instead of that, if you know what I mean.
Absolute pleasure to talk to you, Huw. If you've enjoyed what you've heard tonight, please don't forget to find us on Medium at Hiraeth Blog Cymru, on Facebook at Hiraeth Blog Cymru, and on Twitter at Hiraeth Blog. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate and review.